Hello everyone, it's Robin the Delta Crafter, and I want to thank you for joining me for another video on my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be talking about limes. I know you're scratching your head and wondering, what do limes have to do with card making? Well, I'm about to tell you. In this video, when I'm talking about limes, I'm not actually talking about the fruit. I'm talking about an acronym that my crafty friend Ardyth came up with. LIMES is a way for you to analyze inspiration and change it up to make your own creation. So LIMES stands for list, include, modify, exclude, and spin. I'm using a card that Ardyth made as my inspiration. So let's take a look at it. In this card, you can see that Ardyth used a wave motif as well as a rainbow color effect, and it is a happy birthday card. So when you're making a list, you want to list the things about the card that you remember or that are attracting you. So like the color, the technique, the occasion, and so forth. Then when we move on to include, we want to talk about the things that we want to include from the inspiration card in our card. So I'm going to include the wave motif. Then for modify, we can talk about the things that we're going to modify about the card. So I'm going to modify the color scheme as well as the occasion for the card. The next thing we're going to talk about is exclude. What I'm going to exclude from the card are the stars and the heat embossing. The S stands for spin, and the spin that I'm going to put on my card is that I'm going to be using sequins. So let's go ahead and take a look at the products we're going to be using. To make this card, we're going to be using the Go With The Flow stencil from Tailored Expressions. We're also going to be using the Hello There Stamp and Cut set from Hero Arts. I have 4 different distress inks that we're going to be using, which are Mermaid Lagoon, Tumbled Glass, Peacock Feather, and Salvage Patina. Of course, we're going to be using a couple of blending brushes. Those are also from Tailored Expressions. I have a couple of Nina Classic Crest Solar White card panels in the 80-pound weight. And then for my card base, I'm going to be using a piece of Accent Opaque cardstock in the 120-pound weight. Let's go ahead and get started. So if we think back to the inspiration card, we noticed that Ardyth had waves, and there were several waves that were overlapping and going across each other. So in order to create that same effect with this stencil, we're going to be using both sides of the stencil. But because we're using both sides of the stencil, and you can see that this stencil is pretty detailed, and so I would typically use some pixie spray on the stencil like this, but because we're going to be using both sides of the stencil, I can't do that with this particular technique. So I'm just going to put a couple of pieces of Easy C tape and tape my card panel to the back of my stencil, and I'm going to put that in several different places to kind of help hold the card panel to the stencil. And I'm also going to be using my hands quite a bit to hold the intricate pieces and cuts of the stencil in place as I ink it up. So I'm going to come in with my first set of lighter color. So in my color choices, I chose a lighter tone and a darker tone of like an aqua color, and then a lighter tone and a darker tone of blue. So I'm going to come in with a very light hand and apply this Salvage Patina to the top half of this card panel. And this is going to give us our first layer of ink on our card panel. So I'm going to apply that with my blending brushes, and I'm going to try to get that into all the spaces, going in both clockwise and counterclockwise motions, swirling that onto the paper. You can see there I'm getting a decent amount of the ink on, but I'm going with a light hand so that it's not overwhelming in the beginning. So I turn my paper around, and now I'm going to come in with the Tumbled Glass. So this is my lighter shade of blue. And now I'm going to add that Tumbled Glass to the bottom half, or the other half of my card panel. I'm starting off the paper so I don't have any harsh lines and brush marks. And I'm going to just add some of this tumbled glass to the bottom half of this card panel. Again, I'm using clockwise and counterclockwise motions to get this ink on here. So I'm finishing up this tumbled glass application on my panel, and now it's time to peel back the stencil. So when we do that, we can see that there are white spaces where the stencil was. And so I didn't want that. If we think back to Ardyth's card, she didn't have white spaces on her card. So I'm going to take my blending brush and come in with the ink that's on there and maybe a little bit more and just ink over all of those white spaces to tone those white spaces back. Again, I don't want just plain white waves all across my paper. I kind of want to fill that in a little bit with some color and tone that back a little bit so it's not so harsh looking. So I'm going to do that with the tumbled glass as well as with the salvage patina so that both sides of the paper, so the full panel, will have all the white spaces filled in. Here's the salvage patina being applied and filling in those white spaces. So now I'm going to bring in the stencil and kind of line it up to make sure that I have the side that I used previously, which will let me know that I actually need to flip the stencil over and use the other side. This is a great way to use and extend your stencils and add to their value in your crafty stash. So I'm going to add some more tape because again, I can't use the pixie spray because now I'm on the other side of the stencil. So the Easy Seed tape is going to help me hold the panel in place on this side of the stencil as well. I'll have most of the products that I'm using today listed and linked on my coordinating blog post that goes along with this video. So be sure to check it out to be linked to the products that I'm using today. The Easy Seed tape is one of my most favorite products and I use it all the time. I keep strips of it next to me at my desk so that I always have them at the ready. So now I'm going to come in with my darker teal color, which is peacock feathers. And I'm going to tap this off onto my glass media mat because I don't want like harsh lines to come in with this darker color. So I'm going to go in again with a light hand and I'm going to add the peacock feather to our panel. So I'm grabbing some more ink and tapping it off and adding that to the inked up panel. Now I'm going to come in with my darker blue color, which is Mermaid Lagoon. And you can immediately see where that is being added and going onto the panel. So I'm having to hold all the delicate pieces of the stencil down, but I think the effect is going to be absolutely stunning. And here's the reveal of the panel. I'm really loving the way this is coming together and the shape that it's taking. Now that I've added the darker colors, I can still see where there seems to be some white showing through. So I'm going back to my first set of lighter colors. That's the tumbled glass as well as the salvage patina. And I'm going to add some more of those colors on top of the colors that I've laid down. So you can see this is kind of a back and forth until I'm able to get the look that I'm going for. So I'm laying on some tumbled glass, covering that and getting that into the white spaces and getting those white spaces covered up. Also, let's keep in mind too that these are dye inks that I'm using. And as always with dye inks, these inks need some time to dry back. So while they may look splotchy in some spaces and places, remember these inks will dry back and they will settle down and everything will be absolutely stunning. Finishing up inking with a little bit more of the tumbled glass, again going back and forth until I get all the spaces filled in. And now let's take a closer look at this panel. I'm really loving how these waves came together and how we were able to use one stencil and extend it to give us a multiple wave effect. So off camera, I went ahead and cut out the hello there sentiment 3 times from some Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock. And I'm going to glue those layers together with my Barely Art Precision Glue. Having these 3 layers is going to allow me to have some dimension in my sentiment. I decided to keep the sentiment white since there was already so much movement and color going on the background panel. Also off camera, I went ahead and trimmed off just a little bit off of each side of the panel so that I have a white border hanging around the edge of my card. So I'm going to add some of this Barely Art Precision Glue to the layers, and I'm going to layer those up. 1, 2, 3. There's 1 and 2. And there's 3. Look how inky my fingers are from making this panel. That just means you are having fun while getting messy during crafting. Let me know in the comments below if you get messy when you're crafting. I know I do. My desk is always a hot mess whenever I finish working on some projects. To add some dimension to this card, I'm going to pop up the card panel using some foam tape. I'm going to put down several pieces of it so that I have good adhesion and I have good dimension that will stand up to mailing and any other process that this card may go through. So I'm going to secure my card panel to my card base, and then I'm going to bring in and kind of place my sentiment to see where I want it to be. I settle on having it centered in the lower half of the card. I really like that placement. Leaves lots of space to see all the waves all around the sentiment. The last thing that I have to add is my spin on the card, which remember I'm going to use the sequins mix to be the spin on my card. This is a sequins mix called Bubbles, and it's from my friend Marisha at the Diary of Belle Rose. She sells them in her Etsy shop, and I'll be sure to link those below as well as on my blog post. So I'm going to come in again with this Barely Art Precision Glue, and I'm going to glue everything down, the sentiment, the sequins, and everything, and it's going to bring this card all together. I'll finish up gluing the sequins down, and with that, this card is complete. I want to thank you for joining me for another video on my YouTube channel. If you haven't done so, I'd love it if you would subscribe and hit the notification bell to be notified of when I post new videos. As always, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at The Delta Crafter, and don't forget to stop by my blog and website, thedeltacrafter.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and I hope you find some time to get crafty. Until next time, enjoy! Bye-bye!